Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and Junior English, and we are in our MyPerspectives volume at page 174. Fame is a Fickle Food, Emily Dickinson's classic little poem. Now, we've commented already in some introductory comments that Dickinson had a very interesting dance with the challenge of fame, much like the British Romantic poet Keats, that for some moments it seems as if that's what she longed for, and then in other moments she was almost detested the idea that she would have to stoop to people reading her material. So as we get into this project here right away, we understand that there's a bit of background that we're going to bring with us. So notice there are no stanza breaks in this poem, okay? And also notice, for students that say, well, all Emily Dickinson does is play with the dash, notice that in this poem we have no dash. Fame is a fickle food upon a shifting plate, whose table once a guest, but not the second time is set, whose crumbs the crows inspect, and with ironic caw flap past it to the farmer's corn. Men eat of it and die. Now, much like success is counted sweetest by those who ne'er succeed, notice here she's going to critique the idea of fame from multiple perspectives. And this is one of the reasons why we love to read Emily Dickinson's poetry, is because she will say, have you looked at it from multiple perspectives? Okay, so you want to be known. Okay, so you want to be well known. That is to say, fame. Think about how fickle that is. But notice the word picture that she plays with is to talk about food. Of course, what's interesting is that you'll assume that she's talking about human food. But then she'll move at the end of the poem to talk about bird feed, bird food, which is fascinating the way she'll play the game. Watch how she does it. Fame is a fickle food, she says, upon a shifting plate. In other words, it's almost like somebody's messing with you and you want that piece of cake, and so they put the plate there and you grab it and put it there and then you grab that kind of thing. In other words, moving the plate all around. In other words, fame of its very nature is very hard to ever actually land on. In other words, the moment that you finally consider whatever it is that you've done to be famous, she says it's very fickle. The plate is constantly moving. Notice, whose table once a guest, but not the second time is set. In other words, fame has this amazing nature to it, that it's very brief. It only lasts for a short period of time, and then it goes away. And, of course, some other object of attention will then take its place. We've, of course, seen this in the role of famous actors and famous athletes and famous musicians. Talk, for example, to people who are 30 years older than you, and they'll talk about some musician or some actor, and you will ask them about them as if, you know, who are they? And the response from the adult will be, what are you talking about? It's impossible that you would not know who that individual is. Notice the next set of lines here, at line 6, the idea of crumbs and crows. Now, of course, the sounds work together so brilliantly. Whose crumbs the crows inspect, and with ironic caw, of course, you've got to circle or square the word ironic, right? Flap past it to the farmer's corn. Interesting. In other words, the crow here is going to be perceived as fickle as well. That will peck a little bit at the crumb that will be dropped, but then the crow turns and looks at the huge field of corn and says, why would I pick a little bit of this when I can go all the way over to that field over there and I can get all the corn I want? And notice there is an ironic caw. Obviously, we're immediately thinking, of course, of our Poe's raven, quote, the raven nevermore. And then the last line, men eat of it. Now, obviously, the antecedent of the pronoun it here is fame, and die. Now, it is fascinating the way that she will use this word die at the end, but notice the absence of any end punctuation. She intentionally uses no period, no dash, and it begs the question, what does she mean by die? Well, obviously, she can talk about you're famous and then, of course, you die and then you're forgotten. No question. But she can also be talking about, and I think she was speaking, and often in many of her poems, Emily was speaking to herself, much like Marcus Aurelius will talk to himself in Meditations. You'll remember that Marcus Aurelius said, "Soon you will have forgotten all things, and all things will have forgotten you." And I find this a fascinating way to read Emily Dickinson, that she's actually kind of writing notes to herself to remind herself, yeah, maybe you want fame, but you know, here's the thing about fame. You eat of it, and then you die. Now, by die, of course, Dickinson can mean more than physical death. There's something about getting the thing you want, but the thing you want is not beneficial for you, and once you get it, you find yourself unhappy. In other words, I wanted to be really known in the high school, and then I became really known, and man, I long for the anonymity that I once had. Very interesting. In other words, there's something that is lost in the process of gaining this fickle thing called fame for her. Well, at 2A, obviously, there's so many different places that you can go. You can write down what for you is a major message here. One would probably be a propedeutic or didactic or instructional. Be careful what you wish for. You might actually get it. At 2B, we pointed out the absence of any punctuation in this poem, and you can maybe jot down, why do you think she does it in this poem with some kind of exclamation point? Would make some sense, right? Like, why? It's almost as if she wants that idea, you eat of it and then you die, to kind of hang out there and linger out there for you to think about. It's quite brilliant. At 3A, I mentioned Marcus Aurelius comes to mind. I mean, here was a guy who asked that his writings be destroyed upon his death. Thankfully, they were not. And in those notes to himself, he will give so often this recognition that, yeah, fame, I don't know about that. You can be really well known, but I don't know that that necessarily means a lot. I mentioned Keats, and I think that Keats plays well here. Ozymandias, Shelley's great poem, is also a poem that comes to mind when he comments on Ozymandias in his little pedestal. I am Ozymandias, king of kings, look on my works, ye mighty in despair. Nothing besides remains around the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lonely stretch. The sands stretch far away. In other words, the sands have covered up everything that's the memory of Ozymandias. Finally, at 3B, what are your thoughts about being known? What are your thoughts about being well known? What are your thoughts about social media and the ways in which social media can make that happen in an instant, and how regularly students often will find themselves longing for acceptance or for approval? But then when they get the acceptance and the approval, or maybe it only is short lasting, they find themselves less happy than they were before. There's a form of maybe a loss or a dying that happens. I hope you will give some thought to this idea. Thank you.